Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York jazz guitarist Charlie Apicella. He talked to us about his 2021 CD, Classic Guitar, and this pandemic world of ours. 2 weeks prior to the January 14, 2021 release, the first run of the vinyl pressing sold out, and the demand remains steady. He opens up about this project, his last live gig of 2020, how he's been living through COVID, and hope for the future. Enjoy.
Well, hey, thanks for taking a minute out, and it's great to see new music out there.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm realizing about musicians putting out music right now is, and there's a couple things coming from my perspective. It's refreshing to still see music coming out, and it almost seemed like when the pandemic started, it was kind of a letdown because you couldn't tour and couldn't do anything. But it seems like the longer we've gone into this, it's actually probably good for the musician to have something to put out there, because it kind of erases that notion that you can't go out live and at least the fans get something.
It's kind of a good situation overall for musicians. The way that technology has improved in the last few years, there's so much of your career you can conduct online. You know, so for me, I have teaching platforms that I use online. I'm able to create videos and attract not only fans, but students. So that keeps your career going. But specifically for me, this record was actually done a year ago, and I was able to put the brakes on it kind of at the last minute in March of 2020. So I was able to actually suspend it and put it out this year. So I was kind of fortunate with that.
Do you remember your last gig before everything shut down?
It was Blue Note. I played Blue Note on that last Sunday in New York, and we've been on the regular rotation for the Brunch series for several years now. I remember New York was almost on an hourly basis. You were hearing more and more strange news coming out, and I left my apartment. I drove from Brooklyn to the West Village where Blue Note is, and I think I made it in like 19 minutes. I mean, there was absolutely no cars on the road on this beautiful Sunday morning in March. It's a pretty eerie situation. But, you know, a few of my fans and friends came, and we had a great gig. It was with Joe Magnarelli, and that was it. That was the last thing I've done in Manhattan now for almost, I guess now it's been 11 months.
Well, what day in March was that?
Like the 13th or 14th. It was that last Sunday. Okay. Sunday in March.
Because it was Friday the 13th, which was everybody's kind of like ominous. And then, Saturday the 14th. I remember I was supposed to go to a gig the 13th that didn't go. Thought I was going to go on the 14th that they still had. And then after that, it was all over with. But I just came across something that I was cleaning up today, and it was one of the last shows that I went to, and it was Bill Frisell on March the 3rd at our gallery, the Nelson. Yeah, it was wonderful, man. I mean, it was like, and now that I look back on that show, it's like we all kind of knew something was going on. It's strange how we were all like animals fleeing an earthquake.
Yeah, right. Right.
Just getting ready for it. So what do you miss the most from that old world that, hopefully we get back to at some point in one version or another?
Well, being here in New York, the thing that I kind of don't even know what I miss yet. You know, I know that Jazz Standard has closed, but leading up to this, there's such a rent and, lease crisis in New York. Properties for people to rent residential are just, the rent is ridiculous. And the way that business properties conduct their business also is really bad. Two of my all-time favorite clubs closed. Obviously, they would not have even probably survived through this pandemic, but within the last 2 years, they were small, one place was called Luca's Jazz Corner, and that was an Italian restaurant, a very nice Italian restaurant, this fella from Milan, Italy. And for a few years, he was booking Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays in the corner of the restaurant. He spent all this money on great film equipment and lighting, and he put acoustic paneling in the ceiling, and he was such a jazz lover and enthusiast that he turned his beautiful restaurant into a wonderful club. So we were playing there. His rent increased. He had to retire. There was another place on the west side, which was called Soundbite, and that was around for barely 2 years. And same sort of situation. It was a small little restaurant that had jazz at night. And these were places that were run by, this one particular was run by a musician, a vocalist and her husband. And the hospitality in there was great. There were no frills. It was just really about presenting the music to the community. And they had the same situation. They were doing well, and when their lease came up, the landlord increased it to an astronomical amount, and they had to close. So this is a situation that really has been underappreciated for quite some time. So the few small venues like that even still exist are the things that I'm anticipating going to miss when this is all over.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's the most heartbreaking about this is talking to musicians from all over the place. They're talking about clubs that are closing and like the Blue Whale in LA and all of these places. And it's like, you know, it's just, I don't know, man. I can't even get into it that much because it's so hard to even conceptualize, because jazz is already a world that's hard to get a leg up on. And then you start taking these places away and it's like, I don't know, but the jazz community is very innovative and very, very much survivalist in the music world. So there's a level that I think is going to be rebounding and triumphant overall. But
well, people love the music. It's not really the music that's in any way not able to survive in the marketplace. It's these, you know, when it comes to New York, music is what drives tourism. Music is what drives people to come out of their house and go spend money at small, you know, with small businesses. So it's not the music itself that has any sort of problem. It's like that old story, who knows if it's true, but that whole thing about how in the 1950s, the record label called Duke Ellington into the executive's office and said, "Duke, I'm sorry, we're going to have to drop you from the label. You're not selling enough records." And Duke Ellington said to him, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was under the impression that it was your job to sell the records. I'm supposed to make them." You know, like, that's always the situation. Jazz has no problem surviving. It's not about surviving. People love it. Kids, you know, everywhere up from, music programs in schools all the way up to, nice, healthy audiences for regional jazz festivals. So really, it's the economics of just keeping a business together that are what makes it endangered.
What do you ultimately want the listener to get from this new album? How do you want them to feel about what you put out?
I feel like, my closest collaborator is Alan Corzin, the drummer I work with. And we often talk about how we almost view ourselves sort of like curators of the music that we love. And for me, this album was really a tribute to the guitar, I love collecting vinyl. I love finding and sharing these somewhat obscure jazz guitar records with the guitar community. I would share a lot of them with Vic Juris. He passed a little over a year ago. Dave Stryker, Mark Rebo, John Pizzarelli. I sent him files after I take the vinyl records and I record them and I kind of, share them with folks. So I've really recently discovered Johnny Smith. He's a new, very important favorite of mine, but someone that I only recently started listening to. Obviously, Joe Pass, Bucky Pizzarelli. I love, a lot of people that I mentioned in the liner notes here on this record. I love Barry Galbraith. I love Tony Mottola. So these are people who are my interests, sort of not the things that I'm usually interested in, which is Wes Montgomery, Grant Green, Pat Martino. It's kind of a different facet. And I draw inspiration from these guitarists when it comes to my standards playing and my arranging music for the guitar.
How do you, being in the epicenter of jazz in New York and just with what you've seen over the last year and as a jazz musician, how do you see kind of the reality of getting back to live music? I mean, minced with some hope, what are you seeing as this year unfolds happening?
Well, I've actually been very lucky. The fortuitous side of releasing this record now is that it contains several solo guitar arrangements that I've written, right? So unaccompanied guitar. And I sort of play in the Barney Kessel, Joe Pass style when it comes to solo guitar. Ever since last year, I've been able to nail down quite a few solo guitar gigs. So I'm playing a lot of the similar venues that kind of keep my income steady, which are, restaurants and, wineries, things like that, where I'm able to play solo guitar on a more regular basis, a couple times a week. So for me, oftentimes guitar players, I feel like, don't get called for bands. Oftentimes we're leaders. And the ability to play solo guitar has really, not only am I the leader, but I'm the entire band. So my performance career has been very strong. The upside of that is when you're playing solo guitar in the style that I do on this record, it really, it's quite a workout practicing to get to the level on these standard songs where you can perform them. So it's my practice routine has really been refined, and it's really brought my whole game to a whole other level. Since I'm doing those type of gigs now, it's just almost coincidental that this is the record I'm releasing at this time where I just happen to be playing more gigs solo, more gigs where I have the opportunity to play standards, which is a different approach than we take on our usual Iron City records.
Which is, I think, the interesting thing about this whole pandemic and how life works is that we always talk about luck and timing, and I think that's really what it comes down to. I mean, I've talked to musicians that didn't even know that any of this was going to happen, and they recorded a gig in January, and they've now put it out as a live recording. And
right.
Right. Those kinds of things where it's like they went all out, and they just did it because they wanted to test the waters. The technology was there, as you've alluded to before, and it's like that's the luck of all of it. And I think also, too, a lot of musicians that I've heard, overwhelmingly amount of musicians have already had material they recorded, and life slowed down and afforded them the opportunity to mix and polish and get it going. So I think that's kind of a part of all of this. I don't know that any of us anticipated that it would go on this long. I mean, I don't think we had that Fauci wisdom about it, but I think, now that we're here, I think we're a lot closer to being done with this than we are not being done with this.
Oh, I agree, too. And, there's been quite a phenomenon that every single gig I play, I have people coming up to me and thanking me, just for coming out. And, people are just so appreciative that there's live music. I think it really always has a soothing effect on people's soul, but even more so now. So, I feel like a little bit more renewed sense of what I do and how it has a positive impact on folks. When you ask me what I want people to get from this record, it's the same thing I want them to get from every record. I just want it to sound good. I want it to sound like me. And I don't really try too hard to make it sound like me. I just try to make it sound polished and good and have the performances be on that high level. I'm always shooting for, I kind of view, and that's kind of the benefit of living in New York, is I kind of view the jazz community as sort of a guild, and I'm one of the younger guys, and I'm just really so happy to have any opportunity to interact with folks of a generation before me. And I do have plenty of opportunities to do that.
So I guess in a more hyper-specific way, we've danced around it a little bit. What do you ultimately hope that, musicians and fans get from this long absence away from live music that hopefully is long lasting?
I think that we need some dramatic economic stimulus in the country, which is more sustained in the sense that it gives more of an even playing field for people who are in professions or in jobs that don't make as much money. So, in other words, you know, I'm able now to do some gigs here and there, you know, with the enhanced pandemic employment insurance and so forth. If you claim, you know, the few gigs that you have, you know, then they reduce the amount of money that you're getting for the, you know, for the allotted amount that you're getting. But really what it amounts to is almost like a government subsidy for these restaurants to have music. So, for example, if I had a gig at a restaurant and I'm getting an allowance every month as a musician, it's subsidizing that venue to have music. So that boosts their business. It boosts, you know, because the economy is an ecosystem. And I think that that's really what we're learning. If you really talk about the bigger picture of how everyone is, you know, how everyone interacts with each other, because that's really what music performance is you're taking an opportunity to interact with folks. You know, so if you kind of like zoom out and look at the bigger picture with things, I think that subsidized art is an incredibly cost-effective and valuable thing that our society needs to really consider investing in.
I think that's interesting. I even think about that from a biological standpoint. You know, there was a time there in the summer when I would talk to people and they didn't know anybody that had COVID. And then all of a sudden it spread and trickled down kind of like the economy did in the very beginning of this. And you were going to funerals. Like it started closing in on you. And I think that's the notion of the economy right now. It's like, you know, there was a lot of things that no one recognized. I mean, there was the toilet paper and all that nonsense. But from a real standpoint, it's kind of like when a recession happens, when the housing bubble blew up in '08. It took a while for everybody to really feel it on the ground, and I think that's the big thing about, you know, getting another stimulus check and getting breaks and getting, you know, some of these things for, you know, artists to start kind of kicking the economy back into gear. And I think that people are going to spring when that cage and that key falls to the ground, the animals are going to run free. That's all there is to it. So,
yeah, I mean, I think there's just, you know, I think that the extended period of time that we've been in this situation has just illustrated a lot of opportunities, you know, just ways we can make things better. And I feel like music, not only music education, but also music performance, can really play a big role in people's lives, you know. But it all comes down to money. It all comes down to spending money the right way, you know, in a way that's going to keep, you know, just having a good, you know, and a good investment, a good benefit to society.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it is. I think it's one of the wisest. If we didn't have arts, music, visual, movies, TV throughout this whole time period, it would be very dark. So I think hopefully people realize the importance of art more and more, especially after this period of pandemic.
That's what I think I'm recognizing. Yeah, definitely.
Charlie, thank you for taking a minute out today to talk about the album, this very strange world we're in right now, and good luck with the return and the new album.
Yeah, man. I mean, if I could just give a little plug here, it's ironcity.nyc. The record sold out. You know, it was kind of an experiment to release it on vinyl, and the record sold out 2 weeks before its release date. So that was really great. This is my first record that I ever had the distributor order a second pressing, let alone 2 weeks before it was even released. So that felt really good. And then I just learned a couple days ago that we were #1 on the classic jazz radio chart for what's called the RMR Top 50. So that feels really good too. So I guess going back to the roots of why I'm interested in this music, you know, really seemed to pay off this time.
That's wonderful. Charlie, hey, thanks again, man. Good luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Great talking to you, man, as always. Thank you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Charlie for his time, cool, and for consistently reaching out to the show with his quality tunes. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.